All right, so tonight we're going to get into it. I think it's time we begin to kill the number one killer of all time, don't you? Heart disease has been a plague of America for a number of years. So tonight we're going to give you some keys on what it is and how to get rid of it forever.
So let's dive in. As you can notice, the death statistics, according to the CDC, from 1975 to 2015, are we really making a difference? At the top of the list, the number one killer is still heart disease.
Yeah, an interesting thing about heart disease, even though the predictions are what they are, it's kind of going down in direction. The future predictions are not quite as favorable, and so we've got to understand that even though we're kind of seeing the stroke and cardiovascular disease increasing disproportionately over the course of time, we're seeing less deaths, but we're seeing more people get sick. So therein lies the kind of rub, if you will. So we want to kind of unwind that tonight. We want people to not get sicker, but live longer while being more well. How many can agree with that? Okay?
So let's get a little bit more into the specifics, right here and now. Heart disease statistics. Someone dies every 34 seconds of heart disease. That means about 2,500 Americans die from heart disease every day. About 610,000 people die every year in the United States from heart disease. Every 40 seconds, someone, and maybe even someone that you love, has a heart attack. At least 250,000 people every single year die of heart disease or a heart attack before they reach the hospital.
Sobering statistics. What are we doing about it? Let's start to make us think a little bit. Certainly, we have to understand there's been a dietary recommendation to reduce fat, right? We understand that fat is important because in that context or that style, that fat, the increase of it can build up cholesterol, and in turn, cholesterol in the blood can therefore increase the production of plaque. Okay, that's the first strategy. Second strategy is this: if cholesterol is the bad thing and is the definite precursor, then we also have to have drugs to lower cholesterol. Therefore, the statins came in, and they can help decrease plaque buildup in theory. But as you can see by this slide behind me with the number, that is gigantic business.
So with the employment of the current reduction strategies, we must really ask ourselves these questions. Is heart disease still the number one killer? We saw the statistics. Is lowering cholesterol really the answer? Is reducing fat the answer? Do statin drugs have negative side effects? So, statistics of concern. Did you know that approximately 50% of patients who have a heart attack or stroke have normal cholesterol? We might need to redefine normal. Normally, these people are dying of heart disease. They've got normal cholesterol. Approximately 50% of patients that had an emergency room cardiovascular visit resulted in death with normal cholesterol levels. Every year, heart disease and stroke cost the nation $316 billion. Maybe we should be spending our time and money elsewhere. Food, clothing, shelter, other things. These statistics kind of start making us scratch our heads and really start to make us think.
I think as we go forward on this, I think we begin to question that concept of normal, don't we? So I want you to kind of catch this. Now, prescription drug marketers, and we're not knocking prescription drugs. Let me just put that caveat here. But we are saying you have to understand statistical relevance. So there's a way that these prescription drugs are marketed, and the deception is alive and well. So let's pretend for a second, as you can see in this kind of busy slide behind me, there are two groups of 1,000 people. And let's say that as this slide goes, one group has statin drugs, because we know that that's going to, in theory, reduce the risk of cardiac event, correct? You guys with me so far? And let's take the other group of 1,000 people taking a placebo. In other words, they don't know what they're doing. Neither group knows exactly what they're taking. And let's say at the end of this certain time frame, they determine that 20 people from the placebo or non-statin drug group had cardiac events. And let's say also in the other group of the statin drug group that 10 people had cardiac events. So therefore, you could go down and with something called absolute risk rate or absolute risk ratio, we could say that the statin drug group had an effect about 1% of the time. Everybody with me on that so far? And we could say that the placebo group didn't have any effect, but we know that 20 people from that group had cardiac events. So if we look at it and stopped right there, and the drug marketers were really honest and forthright in that particular presentation, they would say, well, we know that 990 times the statin drug did not work. Correct? So in other words, it took 100 people to be treated to make it work in one person. Very important number. I want you to say that the letters NNT. Everybody say NNT.
NNT.
NNT is the number needed to treat. Therefore, it took 100 people taking a statin drug to make it work one time. Now watch this. That is not broadcast by the marketers, is it? Because nobody would use them. Nobody would use them. And we already talked about the big business nature of the drug industry. Make no mistake about it, the drug industry makers want you to use what? Does that make sense? Doesn't a bread manufacturer want you to buy bread? Right? That's what they want you to do. So here's what the drug makers do. Instead of using absolute risk, and instead of using the real number needed to treat, they go down further and they pull out the 20 people that had events from the placebo group. And they pull out the same number of people from the statin group. So they have 20 people and 20 people now. And they know this 20-person group from the placebo group had events, right? And they also know that only 10 out of this 20 people now that they've cherry-picked, I'll use that word intentionally, out of the statin group, only 10 of those had events. So therefore, let's use a new number. Let's call it relative risk. And now we can say, that makes a pretty good headline, cholesterol meds or statin drugs can reduce the risk of heart disease by 50%. That sounds a whole lot better than they don't work 99% of the time. And we're giving you the truth, right? We just wanted to kind of prompt some thoughts. And by the way, Dr. Michelle mentioned the question, is there negative effects of statin drugs? We just randomly picked the Mayo Clinic. Pretty good place. How many think that's kind of a reputable organization? You can look for yourself. What are the potential effects of statin drugs? Here's what they are. Muscle pain and damage. Sounds pretty enticing, doesn't it? Liver damage. And here's my personal favorite. This is really good. Increased blood sugar or type 2 diabetes. Now that's classic. Now let's see what we can do to fix the heart problem while we're creating the diabetic problem, which by the way leads to more heart conditions. Neurological side effects, reduction of energy production through the inhibition of CoQ10 synthesis in the energy pathways. Kind of makes one think and go, hello, I think we need to open our eyes and see things a little bit differently.
So what really causes heart disease and what is going on with this epidemic? You know, the first two things that you see up there, we can't really do a whole lot about. Age, we're all going to get older.
Wish we could do something about that.
And what about family history?
Sometimes we wish we could do something about that too.
It's important to know that you can't do something about those two, but there is something you can do about the rest. You can take care of your blood pressure. You can take care of inactivity. We might just need to get moving. We can give up that thing called the cancer stick, cigarette smoking. We can change diabetes with our lifestyle. We can change obesity, and we can change our cholesterol numbers. All of these risk factors really are what cause heart disease. And heart disease, the bottom line, is endothelial dysfunction and inflammation. So let's get into it. Let's talk about who are the savory players in heart disease.
Man, and there are many. So we're going to play a little game now. The little game is called Who Is This? So here's your first test of who is this? Who is number one? Everybody say it. There's our friend Ronald McDonald, the best clown in town, who's force-feeding a burger to some poor unsuspecting child. It gets worse, though, because now Ronald McDonald is actually holding a gun to your head. He's getting violent now. The gun is like marketing that's crafty. But there's good news for you out there, ladies and gentlemen, and boys and girls, for all of you listening tonight. Ronald has put on some weight. And now you can run away even if he's got a gun. He has heart disease, diabetes, and cancer right now, unfortunately. That's number one. The second person to play Who Is This game is this. Who is this guy? This is the Burger King guy. He's come to take your soul. And we take our soul when we lose our health, ladies and gentlemen. There's nothing worse than being alive but being dead while you're alive. I want you to let that sit there just for a moment. Nothing worse than being alive but being dead while you're alive with no hope. Oh, it gets better. Who's this person? She changed her name to protect her identity. This is not little Debbie like you think it is. This is little diabetes.
Which is the precursor to?
That's right, to heart disease. You gotta love it. All right, now, the next one, what? We're gonna go from the who to the what. What is this? That's Coke. Isn't Coke the real thing? Or is it the real thing? Do you know that diet soda is just as bad as methamphetamine? Now, we live in Oklahoma. I know some of you around the country or don't live in Oklahoma. However, we know methamphetamine is a menace to society, is it not? Very addicting, destroys lives. Guess what Diet Coke does? And we fall for this trap of saying, just have one. It won't hurt you. I read that somewhere in Genesis 3 one time, and it had a great impact on me. The next one, you got to be careful because we know that there is truth in advertising, right? We know it's there because, unfortunately, donuts just can't be bad, can they? No, they can't. And I like the quote on there that talks about, tell me again how you got that preferred customer card at Krispy Kreme. You don't know how many people have came into our office and they have all kinds of sickness and disease conditions. And we ask them the question, how would you rate your current nutrition plan? Poor, fair, or good? And they say good, or they say fair. What, do you eat any sugars, grains, and breads? Do you have any donuts? Well, just occasionally. I just have one on Sunday at church. Makes you think. Are we making a mistake, ladies and gentlemen? I think we are. What about this? This is great, because one company actually came out with their favorite Barbie. You got to appeal to the kids, man. I don't know about you, but I want in my collectible cabinet, in my Barbie doll collectible cabinet, which I know you're wondering right now if I really, really have it. I'll let you wonder that for the whole time. But I've got to have an overweight Barbie that has a Krispy Kreme logo on her skirt. I just have to have that. That is important. That's going to be a collector's item one day because it's going to be the greatest joke of all time. We got you. We got you. Don't let that be ringing in your ears. Now, maybe, just maybe, one apple a day does keep the doctor away. Rather than a hamburger today, we'll put you in the hospital. See, if you're kept out of the hospital, there's good news, because if you go to the hospital, of course they're going to feed you more health food. I'm not kidding about that. The food in hospitals is poor. And I want to let that pause for a moment. Do you think for one moment that while you're in the hospital, It is better to keep you comfortable while you die or to get you well so you can leave. Think about that for a moment. Now, we threw those things at you not to take a jab at companies and not to take a jab at profitability, but to take a jab at something called normal. It is very normal for us to think that these things are okay, but ladies and gentlemen, normal is not working. Normal says we're going to die of heart disease. How many here actually have this wonderful drive in their life to say, I really, truly want to die of heart disease? Well, guess what? If you choose to be normal, that's exactly what we're choosing to do. Agreed? Because we're saying, I want to be just like everybody else. I don't want to be different. I want to be normal. And imagine this, in normal blood work, which we're going to talk about in just a second, many times that's compared to a normal population. Normal compared to what? See, you got to begin to question this concept of normal and begin to see yourself as something different, as optimal. Okay? So we're going to teach you how to do that tonight.
So seriously, what can we do with the number one killer? We can go to the doctor all day long. We can get all the best tests and all the best studies that we want, but it's going to take getting those risk factors, getting those markers, and then employing a true remedy.
So this slide is kind of busy, but this is a cross-section of an artery courtesy of Cleveland Heart Lab. They've been so great and so gracious to support us in all our endeavors. But I want you to kind of notice, going from the left to the right, this sort of plaque buildup cascade. That is something that absolutely can be avoided. And all these markers that you see going from the left to the right as this cascade builds, as the disease factors go up, they're all individual risk markers. And tonight, all these markers come into play. It's critically important that everyone here and everyone that's listening understand we have to measure the correct things that give you, the patient, the information you need to correct your health. It's not just what we tell you to do, it's what you learn to do about yourself. Each of these markers are critically important to have. And tonight we're going to go into each individual marker so you can understand all of these and their deadly crimes against really humanity.
So what is the number one marker? Usually you go to the doctor and you get what's called a BMI, or body mass index. Well, we need to really kind of change that standard into what's called body composition. We want to get away from simple scale weight and stop measuring weight and start understanding what our composition is. In fact, we want to get lean mass optimal, and we want to get normal body fat percentage, which is 10 to 20% in men and 18 to 20% in women. And when we have that lean mass optimal and that fat mass optimal, we want to keep it that way. So that's the number one biomarker. It should be considered a vital sign, not scale weight. Then the gold standard for measuring oxidative stress in your body is something called F2 isoprostanes. Well, what are they? It's a fancy way to measure oxidative stress. Well, your body has these things in it called omega-6s, and so does the standard American diet. In fact, the standard American diet is so high in omega-6s that it starts to produce these oxidative radicals called F2 isoprostanes. And we can actually measure this in the urine. And when this marker starts to get too high, it can cause things like high blood pressure. That's right, the vessels start to constrict. It may start to promote clotting. It can result in heart attacks and stroke. So the earliest time that we can actually get these measures marked, we know that we're on the forefront of knowing whether or not we have plaque buildup. In fact, research is starting to show that people who have elevated F2 isoprostane levels are 30 times more likely to develop heart disease, the number one killer. F2 isoprostanes, as you can see by the pictures up there, exercise and daily eating healthy habits, let's be honest, Nutrition will reduce oxidative damage, and activity will reduce oxidative damage. As Dr. Mark went through that little illustration of all of our fun, savory players, you can see that poor food and poor lifestyle habits kind of led into poor Ronald McDonald and poor Little Debbie.
Diabetes, little diabetes.
So
Get her name right, little diabetes.
F2 isoprostanes help us get that measure of oxidative damage right at the start.
So what about the next one? Oxidized LDL. Everyone knows what LDL stands for, low density lipoproteins. We know that there is such a thing as an LDL measurement that we go in our normal blood work and we get. If the LDL goes up, typically and traditionally we're looked at, oh my, we need to go on what kind of drug? Statin, very good. We got to lower that cholesterol. But did you know that oxidized LDL is actually cholesterol that's been modified by oxidation? It triggers inflammation leading to the formation of those plaques in our arteries known as atherosclerosis. And that's hardening of the arteries. So the oxidized LDL also plays a role in increasing the amount of increased triglycerides in our system and increases the amount of fat on our body, which in turn, the fat can enhance the oxidized LDL. So you can see this is kind of a gerbil wheel, if you will, that we got to get off of. As the fat goes up, the oxidized LDL goes up, and so does the inflammation, and it goes on and on and on. Oxidized LDL has been shown to be twice as good. Everyone say twice as good. Twice as good in helping your doctor understand the risk for heart disease as any of the traditional risk factors.
So a couple other markers, ADMA and SDMA. Well, what are these players? Your arteries, your vessels have this thin layer of cells on the inside of them. It's a protective layer, and these cells are in constant contact with your blood supply. And therefore, they play an integral role in your immunity. They play an integral role in blood clotting and in maintenance of your blood pressure. They protect things from getting across that endothelial lining and causing damage. However, when this endothelial lining is damaged, it may indicate that you have premature vascular or kidney disease. ADMA and SDMA, these are compounds that your body makes when proteins are degraded, meaning that endothelial lining is breaking down. So these reduce the body's ability to produce something called nitric oxide, which is what helps your vessels kind of vasodilate and vasoconstrict when you go from sitting to standing, walking to running, and just participating in daily life. So these levels, when they become elevated, may indicate that your blood vessels are starting to get in a world of hurt. You've got endothelial dysfunction and possibly damage. Remember, we said that precursor is endothelial inflammation. We want to catch it early.
So nitric oxide, if it were to be depleted or become dysfunctional, I want you to pay close attention to all of the other functions that are affected. And you can see in the circular diagram those other 6 that are affected. And this is very important to understand because proper nitric oxide function is important to all of these areas to keep in balance. The body's about balance, isn't it? When it gets imbalanced, we begin to have trouble. Where it gets imbalanced physiologically or structurally, we're going to have trouble. And can you begin to see what we talk about when we're talking about systemic harmony versus something called systemic dysfunction? Systemic harmony versus systemic dysfunction. When things begin to go the wrong direction, we know that the body is going to begin to decline and degrade. When things begin to go the right direction, the body has this amazing ability to correct itself. The body has this amazing ability innately to heal itself if we give it the right information. Food is information. What we speak is information. What we learn is information. If we've got the wrong information, watch this, going in here, we've got the wrong information going in here, and perhaps we have the wrong information coming out of here. And on top of that, we got the wrong information coming through here. And then we're surrounded by the wrong information. Guess what the body's going to do? Decline and degrade. And this is what we have to begin to prevent. And it starts tonight.
So just like the endothelial lining of your arteries, when ADMA and SDMA go up, it shows endothelial damage. The kidneys which are important in keeping you well and alive, the kidneys produce something, thank you.
For those of you online, someone just called and somebody just turned their phone off. That was it. So it's all good.
So when the endothelial lining of the kidneys get dysfunctional, sometimes it will leak this protein called microalbumin. Microalbumin will show up in the urine. Your kidneys have this endothelial lining that's kind of like a coffee filter. And if the pores of the coffee filter starts to get holes in it from all of the damaging things coming in from the standard American diet, guess what starts to become injured? The endothelial lining of the kidneys, and protein starts to show up in your urine. Things like blood pressure start to go up. Your body starts to show you signs that there might be damage. So the presence of microalbumin in your urine might be the first sign that you have heart disease. Microalbumin, that coffee filter analogy, this picture up here is really unique in how it shows you that damage to the filter may indicate damage to the kidneys by leading to albumin or coffee grounds in the urine. You know, coffee grounds in coffee indicate a less pure cup of coffee, possibly damage to the filter. Just like microalbumin in the urine, potential damage to the filtration system. Your highway system, your arterial system is congruent throughout your whole body. If you have damage in one vessel, it's not just there, it's everywhere.
When I think of the coffee filter analogy, I think of that concept called normal. And if you'll understand what I'm getting ready to tell you, you'll get it. A lot of people think they can't have a better cup of coffee. They think the coffee's got to have coffee grounds in it, because that's just the way it always has been. They think they can't do any better. But I'm telling you, you can do better. You can get the coffee grounds out of the coffee, just like you can get the microalbumin out of the urine. You have to believe for better, you have to believe for more. What about the next one? CRP, C-reactive protein. What is that? It's produced by the liver when inflammation is present somewhere in the body. Somewhere. Traditionally, this C-reactive protein test has been used to identify perhaps infection or chronic inflammation conditions. Now, there's a little bit of a newer test available. It's called high-sensitivity CRP, or known as HS-CRP, that measures smaller amounts of CRP or C-reactive protein in the blood. Now, inflammation in the system might not always be obvious, and many times it is simply missed by standard testing. Chronic inflammation can occur in the arteries, of course, in the heart, and that may lead to a role in the development and the progression of something called heart disease, and that can act as the silent killer. So sometimes it is missed quite often. For people who have had a heart attack before, elevated CRP levels may actually indicate another ischemic event may be on the horizon. So this is an incredibly important measure. Now, to really understand this further by way of analogy, we're trying to give you a lot of analogies tonight, again, so that you'll remember this forever. You can see the bell curve in the top graph and then the flat line in the bottom graph. What do those mean? The bell curve in the top is this rapid, incredible, acute inflammatory response in the body. Now, that can be something that's resulting from an infection, a cold, or even after an intense workout. It can go up. Inflammation is not a bad thing, is it, in this case? It's doing its job of healing. Without inflammation, we would die. So when you start to talk about inflammation, you got to talk about acute inflammation versus chronic systemic inflammation. Look at the bottom graph, the flat line one. This is what is the danger factor. It's like that match that just won't go out. It's like a pilot light that you can't blow out. It goes up and stays up, and all it's waiting for, listen, is some gas. And the gas is more inflammation or more oxidized LDL. And these things begin to combine to create a forest fire of their own that's called heart disease. So we have to understand that chronic inflammation is the problem. Inflammation in general is not the problem. Inflammation is life-saving. Chronic inflammation is life-taking.
So we want to really make sure you understand that there are sides or degrees of vulnerable plaque. The outside of the vessel wall means that you may actually have a volcano that is erupting, or the inside of the vessel wall where the volcano is there, it's just hot. Two markers, MPO. MPO can tell us about circulating white blood cells. You have an army inside your endothelial lining, underneath your arterial wall, that's there protecting you all the time. And it can start to secrete MPO when a fire is hot. Just like LPPLA2, this activity can tell us if there is active inflammation and you're about to step yourself over into that heart attack or stroke. LPPLA2, this measures the presence or your risk for active heart disease. That's not a marker that we want to see there. You know, when LDL cholesterol gets into the artery wall, remember we talked about F2 isoprostanes getting underneath the endothelial lining, becoming oxidized? Well, unfortunately, the immune system, it tries to act on this and create inflammation. And increased cholesterol accumulates in the wall. The body is trying to take care of it. I mean, where does all that stuff go? It's going underneath the endothelial lining, forming what is called plaque. And this plaque, if it gets more and more and more, eventually that cap on the plaque, like a volcano, it's gonna rupture, and that lava is gonna go where? Right into your system and cause that heart attack and stroke. It's been there for a while, but we really haven't been paying attention to it. So MPO is an enzyme. It's an enzyme that's released by white blood cells that measure your body's response to damaged artery walls. When they become thin or cracked or eroded, ultimately it's because of due to this cholesterol that your immune system is trying to digest, and really the immune cells are getting fat underneath the endothelial lining, and they become what's called foam cells. And then these immune cells, they're trying to kill this response of cholesterol coming in by secreting something called MPO. So MPO really damages the cholesterol, and it starts making more of these foam cells. These foam cells are now fat and sick, and the artery wall is inflamed. And over time, the body just cannot keep up. That volcano ruptures, and the plaque buildup now becomes a hot clot, causing a heart attack or stroke.
Hot clot, not what you want in life. So really, when we look at this, what does it all mean? So when you get your blood tested and you're specifically testing these markers, and you see that LPPLA2 and or the MPO, myeloperoxidase, start to get out of balance. So as you can see by the graph, when you have low levels of LPPLA2 and high levels of MPO, you've got a less active artery wall, but you have an unstable cap. How many think that's bad? Okay, that's bad. Remember, they're all independent risk markers, so they all add up to problems. But if you have a high LPPLA2 and a low MPO, that means you have a very active artery wall, but a more stable cap. Is that a good thing?
Yeah.
Well, it's better than having an unstable cap. You know, you've heard keep your hats on. This is a good time to keep your caps on. Because when the cap blows off, that's when those pieces and that blood clot forms, and it either passes or causes a blockage. That's when we begin to have problems. What about when both are elevated? Is that a bad thing? LPPLA2 goes up, myeloperoxidase goes up. We have an active wall with a vulnerable cap. It is like Mount St. Helens that's been casting out tremors, and it's getting ready to blow up. Now, we've seen that a few times in here, believe it or not. You know, and we want to get on that fast. That's why I love these markers so much, because it creates an event for a person. Hear our hearts with this before they end up in the emergency room. I'd rather them have an event right back there in the office that's on paper than I would have them have an event down at St. Francis Hospital, one of the best hospitals around. But I want the events happening before the events happen so that they can get free from the actual event. Saves money, saves lives, and saves time. Time called life.
So inflammation testing really assesses disease risk. From the very beginning, F2 isoprostanes, remember that shows us about oxidation. It shows us about is LDL starting to get under that endothelial lining and cause oxidized LDL? Oxidized LDL increases your risk for metabolic syndrome. And metabolic syndrome is the precursor to diabetes. Metabolic syndrome comes with 5 things: triglycerides, HDL that's low, blood pressure that's up, obesity, and high blood sugars. So those are all risk factors of heart disease. ADMA and SDMA, we talked about that being endothelial lining markers. And then microalbumin, the endothelial lining marker of the kidney, showing possible structural injury. General inflammation, relationship to HSCRP, whether it's cardiac or heart, or whether it's a systemic global problem. It still means there's the presence of dis-ease. What about disease activity? As Dr. Mark just talked about, the definitions of LP-PLA2 and MPO, and what that meant versus having your cap on and your cap off, it helps us take a look at how inflamed our systems are, and it helps us get power in our lives by knowing that we really do have the upper hand. So once we come to understand all of these individual risk factors and where our scorecard is, it's time to get into the game and start the show. Well, what's that show? How do we really fix this thing?
So we've done our best to paint a picture for you tonight. Before we go further, I want to just pause right there for a moment. We've done our best to paint a picture of tonight of a real problem. The number one problem. Would everybody agree? We've done our best to paint statistical averages and even predictions about where it's said to be. Would everyone agree that's not a good place? We've done our best to talk about what we're doing about it currently. We brought into question what is normal. We've shown you statistics that are real and true to kind of tell you that perhaps we need to take a better approach. So now we're going to kind of unwind a remedy that's going to work every time. If you do this remedy, you will absolutely improve without question. And we're 100% sure about that. So let's kind of start right here. First of all, you got to start with these 2 words. Everybody say the first one, nutrition. And what's the second one?
Exercise.
One more time, nutrition.
Exercise.
You can't get away from that. You just can't get away from it. We have to start here and have to understand that 85% of long-term outcome for our health is tied to nutrition. One of our favorite sayings are twofold: you can't outrun the fork. Don't you love that? How about the second one? The greatest medical decision you make is at the end of what?
Or fork.
That is 85% of what we do. If you can get 85% right on a test, you're always going to make a B. It's sure better than making an F. And what we've been doing is, frankly, ladies and gentlemen, making an F. Oh, we might give ourselves a D, but if it's still number 1, that's not good enough. When we can do better. The rest of health, that 15% is kind of tied to stress, activity or lack of it, life management, sleep. It can be challenging sometimes, can it? But we always have to start with that biggest chunk, that biggest return on investment that starts with nutrition. You got to start there. There's no other place. Really, because how many in here are into investments? How many want a great investment in life? Well, guess what? If you have that desire and you want the greatest investment in life, don't you invest in the things with the greatest guarantee for positive return? That's like a no-brainer, isn't it? So we always have to start right here. Now, we laid out some guidelines for you there, of course, and you can read those. We're talking about simple nutrition, fruits, vegetables, and proteins and healthy fats. You don't want to go over the top with protein because, as Dr. Michelle says, if you have the ADMA, SDMA elevated, perhaps and even microalbumin, you may be spilling out protein. So it's not about protein, and more protein. It's really about better food, and better food. You know, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, once said, "Let food be thy medicine." How many think that guy was right on it? A man before his time. Or maybe he wasn't a man before his time. Maybe he was right on time, and perhaps we have neglected our forefathers' history here. Perhaps we've turned our back on things and said, maybe we can do a little bit better. There's nothing wrong then with making changes and making modifications and evolving through time. I'm grateful nobody drove up out here in a horse. That's kind of cool. You're driving cars. That's evolution. That's proper growth. But what about us neglecting the things of our forefathers that they knew that were right, and we've turned our back on those? Medicine is not going to fix the problem. It might put a Band-Aid on it. It might keep you alive a little longer to fix the problem. Granted, there is no medication, no supplement, no procedure, and frankly, no prayer that will override the negative effects of chronic ingestion of the standard American diet. I'm going to say that one more time because I want you to tweet that on somewhere. There is no drug, no supplement, no procedure, no prayer that's going to override the chronic ingestion of the standard American diet. Amen. That's a fact. And you can take that and argue and say, well, nobody's going to do that. Well, I don't think I'm looking at a bunch of nobodies. I think I'm looking at a bunch of somebodies. Is there any nobodies out here? Well, then look at yourself and your neighbor and understand that you are somebody. That's why you're here. You want to do this. So you can do this. The standard American diet is full, chock full of things that are going to kill you and drive the endothelial inflammatory markers and cause heart disease every time. And that is sugars, artificial sweeteners. Every time. Sorry, that's the truth. Breads and grains. I don't have time to go into all of the scary things about our grain population and the harvesting today. Trust me, it's dangerous. And I think we've yet to uncover the negative effects of the ill-advised production of the food pyramid. I think we're just starting to see that right now in our generation, and it's time that we wake up and do something different. Now, what about the fried foods and the GMO foods, the chemically full foods, the sodas? All of this stuff, truly, the word Standard American Diet acronym is what? SAD. It is very sad, and it leads to death. The true remedy to heart disease, prevention and even reversal, and further avoidance, if you want to look at it like that, is really about nutrition. It's got to begin there. It must begin there. Because if it doesn't begin there, I promise you where it will end, in the statistics of normal. And that's not where we need to be.
So these unfoods, the foods that you want to avoid all the time. You know, if you're going out to dinner with someone who has a history of being alcoholic, would you have a glass of wine with that person? If you went to a party and someone was addicted to drugs, would you light up a joint? No. Well, why do we continue to bring cakes and sweets and treats and fatty foods and these things that are causing heart disease to our loved ones, feed them to our children in times of emotional stress, in times of celebration, in times of joy? What are we doing when they're all unfoods? And these are the things that are leading to the number one killer, which is heart disease. We have to stand up and say, no, this is the temple that I live in, the only one that I've got, and if I've got these inflammatory markers, perhaps it's my fault. I'm not taking the necessary action in saying no and avoiding the things that are bringing disease to my household and to my table. I have patients come in all the time and they say, doctor, what about just one serving of chips? Well, we all know where that leads. Can you stop at one serving of chips? One serving of chips is just like one glass of alcohol. Before you know it, it's all rolling back on that same gerbil wheel train. So here is the deadly chemical concoction that you should memorize. You should memorize this slide. There are 20 ingredients up there that if you haven't ever just turned your labels around and look at what you're ingesting every single day, 365 days of the year, and you wonder why you're sick. Perhaps we have to look at what we're doing. Just getting rid of sugar, corn, MSG, the trans fats, the saturated fats, the sucralose, the potassium sorbate, the soy lecithin, sodium chloride, aspartames.
I love it when she talks
food
about it to me
colorings.
like that. It's so good. It's great.
And
Imagine what our conversations are at dinner table.
don't eat that. And the list goes on. So
It's really interesting, you know, we say that we can't avoid these things, and that slide is purposely busy. We want you to know that there's a message behind that. It's confusion. It's confusion and convolution, and that's what happens to the labels. There's just a bunch of stuff thrown on there, and you tend to miss it, just like that slide. What was that? What was that on the right? What is that stuff? That's important. You have to stop and read. If something has a lot of ingredients in it, it's probably time to put it back on the shelf politely and stay out of that section of the grocery store, because it's probably a bunch of chemicals. You know, I watched a person recently, you say I can't do this, I watched a person recently do something extraordinary. He is in the audience tonight, so I won't embarrass him, but it was his own birthday party. What do we do at birthdays? What do we eat?
cake.
So we think there's nothing wrong
Ice
with
cream.
that, but this man has such a heart for people, and I watched this occur. He didn't even have cake at his own party. You know why he didn't? Because there were people around him that were sick because of the ingestion of that stuff. Now, is that guts? Is that what we need to do? How many would agree with that? Is that a good thing? See, he did a good thing. Was he a party pooper? No. He was a party improver, right? He was a party improver because he's going to give himself and everybody else, hopefully, a chance to celebrate more birthday parties with him. Now, we talked about nutrition, 85%. Well, what about exercise? You know, we live in a sedentary lifestyle. Sedentary lifestyle. So we put some general guidelines up here for you. And these actually come from the American Heart Association website. You can go check those things out right there. The bottom line is this. We sit too much. Sitting is the new smoking. It really is. We sit too much. Along with these guidelines, we came up with something really simple that everybody can do. How many in here online and also here have sit-down jobs for the most part? A lot of hands go up. Here's what you can do. Remember the two numbers, 20 and 2. Everybody say 20?
20.
2.
2.
For every 20 minutes you sit, just stand up for 2. During an 8-hour day, you've done 25 squats almost. Pretty cool, huh? The interesting thing about when you stand up, you actually activate an enzyme in your body called lipase that breaks down, guess what? Fat. So you've got to stand up and move. If you can just learn to actually walk down the hallway and speak to someone as opposed to sending a text message. You know, our youngest daughter is here. I remember the time that she was in the back room and sent me a text message. The same house. Say, get your tail out here and speak right now, girl. We have become so accustomed because of the wonderful inventions of technology that we became inactive. And all we have to do is make a purpose to move more than we sit. I'm not saying go to the gym. Just go get out and get some beautiful air. Take off your shoes and go out and walk in some grass. Feel what that's like sometimes. How many get a little bit of peace and relief from walking on the beach? You ever wonder why that is? Because your feet are made for walking, not for hanging over the desk all day. And your arms, well, they were made for moving as well, not for just sitting like this all day and typing on a keyboard. Or, if you're part of the millennials, that, the thumbs. So the bottom line is we need to move. A good number to remember is this, the anaerobic threshold, more or less Above that number, as you can see, is going to be the rate. It's going to be more in the glucose burning mode for the most part, generally speaking. Below that number is going to be more in the fat burning mode. And it makes sense because you can exercise longer and more continually in a lower burning mode, right? So the point is, if you're starting fresh and you haven't been exercising, start slow. Exercise can be done as little as 10-minute increments. Sometimes it's walking to the mailbox for slow and back. Sometimes it's really just walking around your house. The point being, we have to start with nutrition and finish it with exercise. And when we do, the results are going to be extraordinary. We'll begin to see a reversal in this #1 killer of all time. So everybody, and I mean everybody, deserves the opportunity to have that information. Wouldn't you agree? Yes. And so we've arranged for everyone tonight and everyone online to have all this information, because information is power. You know, without this information, people have no ability to make a good decision. Now, I can wash my hands and soak in Dr. Michelle just like this and go on down the road, as long as people have the decision power in their hand. If they decide to say, I want to be normal, that is cool. Breaks our heart, but it's cool because that's their decision. They had every opportunity to make that. What is really troubling to us is people don't have the information. For whatever reason, it's not presented or given to them. They haven't been given the opportunity. So we wanted to do a special thing tonight to make sure everybody had this opportunity. No matter where you are in the country, whether here or there, East Coast, West Coast, all the way in Alaska, we got people listening right now. And they know, because I talked to them today. This is something all of us can do. So here's what you can do. Tonight, you can go right to that website, right now. And you're going to log in. You can get your phone out right now, and you can log into that website, sherwoodwellness.tv/lab. And when you do, you're going to put in your name, your address, your chief concern or complaint or health issue, just a little section. It's going to take you just a couple of moments to do that. You're going to put in your date of birth, of course, and you can take a picture of your insurance card, right? And we're going to call and arrange for you, wherever you are, to have this lab. And then on our own, we're going to give you a way that you can call us to actually interpret that lab for you. And wherever you are in the country, we want you to have that. Now, people say, well, what does it cost? It's going to cost anywhere from $1 up to about $208, but not over. That's with insurance. Okay? We have no guarantee what insurance is going to pay. But you know what? I have no problem saying $208 worst case scenario to get that kind of information is like awesome. As we'll use the millennials, that's off the hook awesome. Kind of is. Now, if we don't have insurance, that lab, anywhere you are, is $400. Okay? And then we're going to call you once you log in right now. We'll call you. We'll set that up for you. And the wonderful people at Cleveland Heart Lab are going to help us do that wherever you live in the country. So I implore you tonight, we implore you with everything, get that information in your hands. Let us help you understand it. And then you make the decision to eradicate this #1 killer.